We're now standing here live with one of the panel testimony people that is testified 3 times already so far this week, and is a nuclear physicist.
Yes.
For 14 years.
Yes.
Worked on many different projects, and he is here stating that UFOs and ETs are real.
Yeah, it's more than that they're real, but some UFOs are intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft. We're dealing with a cosmic Watergate, which means that it's easy to prove that the United States government has been withholding information about UFOs. And once you've looked at a number of blacked out documents and whited out documents, after a while it gets there's no question what's going on.
Absolutely. And so far this week, what have you seen, or what would you say would be the most compelling testimonies yet? What really stuck out in your mind?
Well, I was very pleased to hear. I'd heard about it before, but there was a good job done by the guys talking about UFOs interfering with nuclear missile sites.
Deactivating the nuclear.
Yeah. I mean, it's not supposed to happen. It can't happen, but it did. And those guys are pretty straight. You have to pass tests every once in a while. They don't like guys near the button who aren't sensible,
Sure.
I also was impressed by the foreign information today from South America, especially.
Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, again, I've spoken in South America, but I was particularly intrigued when somebody was asked, well, what's the public attitude and the media attitude and stuff? And they have much less of a problem down there than we have up here. There isn't the spirit of ridicule that's cultivated here. One of the 12 PhD theses that have been done about UFOs dealt with press coverage of the subject. It was written years ago and had some scathing remarks to make about how inadequate it was the failure to deal with the right people, the right information. So that's from a guy who became dean of the School of Journalism at Drake University, not somebody who was selling papers down at the corner. So that hasn't improved a heck of a lot, except that, as was pointed out here, local and regional media do a much better job of covering the subject than the big guys.
Sure.
The Washington Post, New York Times, etc. They think it's all a laugh because they're so darn ignorant.
And they also attend Bilderberg meetings, so who knows what goes on there.
Yes.
That's a whole other topic.
Yes.
And your background, again, is nuclear.
Bachelor's and master's in physics from the University of Chicago. 14 years in industry for little companies like General Electric, General Motors, Westinghouse, McDonnell Douglas, TRW Systems, Aerojet General Nucleonics. This is working on canceled government-sponsored R&D programs. And they weren't small ones. I was working for GE on aircraft nuclear propulsion. Pretty neat. In 1958, we spent $100 million. We employed 3,500 people, of whom 1,100 were engineers and scientists. $100 million is a lot of money in 1958. I mean, it wasn't 4 professors and 20 grad students. It was a lot of work. And one of the things I bring to the subject is that I have lectured at more than 600 colleges and hundreds of professional groups in all 50 states, 10 provinces, 18 other countries. I get around. And one of the things I bring to it is I've spent more time working on far-out propulsion systems. One of the major objections from the nasty, noisy negativists is you can't get here from there. It's too far away. It would take too long, too much energy, blah, blah, blah. Well, I worked on fission nuclear rockets. We tested them. I worked on fusion rockets. We didn't test those. But anybody out there is going to be a little more advanced than we are, or they wouldn't be coming here, And the kicker is, we already know how to get to the stars if we want to spend the money. I'm not saying we should, but that's a different question. Nuclear fusion can be used to kick particles out the back end of a rocket that have 10 million times as much energy per particle as they can get in a dumb old chemical rocket. And we ourselves well, you wouldn't know it from the ancient academics, we went through a really rapid change in the amount of energy at our control. Big bomb during World War II, 10-ton blockbuster, 10 tons of TNT. First nuclear weapon, 1945, 16,000 tons of TNT energy release. First fusion weapon, 1952, just a few years later, 10 million tons in one bomb. And the Russians tested one that was 50 million tons. So from 10 to 50 million is one heck of a jump in a very short period of time. every advanced civilization will know about nuclear fusion because that's what makes the stars work. Anybody will say, where's all that energy coming from? We figured it out in 1938, theoretically. We demonstrated it in 1952, practically. So I'm saying that's a very short period of time. Our first long-distance radio signal was 1901, Marconi. So the notion that they're going to be using our kind of technology, aliens out there, to send us messages. I don't use a slide rule anymore. I did when I started working in industry. So we need a new perspective on the part of the SETI boys. I call them the silly effort to investigate, SETI, instead of search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And I can understand if somebody's coming here, you don't need them. Learn sign language. You know, who needs a radio telescope? But I think we need to get hooked into the real world. They don't even understand the Navy. Nuclear submarines in 1954. Do you realize we have aircraft carriers now that can operate for 20 years without refueling? 20 years. It makes a heck of a difference. So we're using nucleus, but these are not done projects at universities normally. 6 professors, 20 grad students, that's a big program. We're talking, Lockheed developed a stealth aircraft, $10 billion over a 10-year period. Lots of people, because these are big projects that require a lot of people looking at a lot of different things. So I'm trying to bring a sense of reality to this subject. For example, I talk about 5 large-scale scientific studies. Check my audiences. I mean, I talk about a study, show them a slide, give them data, and so forth. How many people here have read this? I'm lucky if it's 1 or 2% who've read any of them. And the noisy negativists never have read them. It's like they don't exist. Don't bother us with them. Look, Carl Sagan and I were classmates for 3 years at the University of Chicago. We're the same age. Well, I'm still around. He isn't, but still. He has publicly stated there are interesting sightings that aren't reliable, which is true. There are some reliable sightings that aren't interesting, which is also true. But then he says there are no interesting and reliable sightings. The biggest study ever done for the Air Force showed exactly the opposite. The more, the higher the quality of the sighting, the more likely to be unexplainable. But the Secretary of the Air Force even lied. Where was the press to say, hey, wait a minute? He said when this biggest study of all was ever done, 3,201 sightings, that's a big study. He said, Secretary of the Air Force did, on the basis of this report, we believe that no objects such as those publicly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. Even the unknown 3% could have been identified as conventional phenomena or illusions. That's a total lie. That study, 3,201 sightings, 21.5% were unexplainable. And there was a separate category, insufficient information, 9.3%. So that wasn't true. And they did a statistical cross-comparison between the unknowns, the only interesting ones, and the knowns, everything else. Probability that these are just misknowns was less than 1%. So a totally false impression was created by no less an authority than the Secretary of the Air Force. So I don't like being lied to.
Absolutely.
So I'm a crusader, if you want to call it that, but I'm not accountable to anybody. I don't have to worry, what's my boss going to say? I'm my boss. So I can spread the word. And I've done debates. I've won debates. Haven't lost any yet. Any challengers out there, I'm all for it.
There you go.
It's a fascinating subject. And we're right on the cusp of a new view of the cosmos. We used to think, okay, we Earthlings are it. These are the only planets there are. We're on top of the heap. Now we realize that with Kepler and so forth, we're probably talking about 8 billion planets in the galaxy. 8 billion. We're not the most advanced.
And that's in our galaxy alone.
Yeah, that's forgetting billions of galaxies. I mean, I'm only interested in the local neighborhood anyway. The case that I think tells us where some of them come from, the Betty and Barney Hill abduction up in New Hampshire. Written a book called Captured with Kathleen Martin, who's Betty's niece. And there were stars seen. There was a star map seen and described after hypnosis, etc. The important thing is here we have 2 sun-like stars that are 39 light years away from us. which is just down the street. Galaxy's 100,000 light years across. Those two stars from each other are only an eighth of a light year apart. They're 35 times closer than we are to the next star over. We're out in the boonies. These guys got next door neighbors. And those two stars are a billion years older than the sun.
Wow.
So planet around one, looking at the other, it's visible all day long. And you could easily determine whether there's biological life on the surface of the planet by the composition of the atmosphere. But they got a billion-year head start on us. You think they don't know something we don't know?
Absolutely. And one last question. What do you think the outcome will be of these hearings? Are we planting seeds here, or do you think something monumental will happen after this?
I'm hoping that we'll get the ball rolling. We have, I made a contribution to congressional hearings in 1968. But there was no internet, no publicity. This thing is being streamed around the world. I think it will have an impact because of the internet, and you can check things out. So I'm an optimist. I think this will do some good. I don't mean that next month the president's going to say, well, I've decided we're going to tell you everything.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Well, I don't think you should tell us everything, because I think that there are military implications here. Why should we release the technology we have learned from crash saucers if the Russians and the Chinese don't release what they have learned? That's not cricket. You don't give your enemies the tools to clobber you with.
Absolutely.
So I'm still an optimist. I've only been lecturing since 1967, so I'm not fed up yet.
Still in the circuit. Excellent. Yeah. And again, thank you for coming out here and your service, and we hope to have you back on the show sometime soon after the hearings.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you.